Hey everyone, I'm Andy Picker, welcome and thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to take a look at a couple of multi-effects units from Tech21. I've got this one, which is the original Flyrig 5, the FR5, and this one, which is the Richie Kotzen signature version of it, the RK5. So these units have both been out for quite a while now. There are loads of reviews, loads of demos of them out on YouTube, so why am I shooting a video now? Well, when I was looking at those videos on YouTube, I found out that there were a few questions I had that didn't seem to be getting answered anywhere. The first question was, if you have the Flyrig and if you have the RK version of it, other than the distortion section, so you've got the Plexi here and you've got the OMG on here, do they sound the same? So is the SandStamp section the same and is the delay the same on the two units? And that's part of the decision of, if I get one, which would I go for, the FR or the RK? The second question would be, is there actually enough gain built into the SandStamp that I can get a good crunchy tone? So I very rarely play a completely clean guitar tone. My bass sound is something like a JCM 800 with the gain turned up to 2 or 3 o'clock. So could I get a decent grind, something in that order, from the SandStamp section and then use the Plexi or the OMG to boost that? Or would I actually end up using the distortion part of the pedal, the Plexi or the OMG, as my bass tone and then have to use a hot boost to push that into a sort of further saturation and a boost for lead playing? Next question I had, and related very closely to that, was if I was to go for the Flyrig 5, would the Plexi actually have enough drive on it to give me a proper heavy rock sound? I know that the RK5 does, but would I be able to get that out of the Plexi? Or would I end up thinking that it was a bit light and didn't quite go far enough? The question I had that I didn't sort of quite get an answer to was how these things would work if you wanted to plug them into a guitar amp, because the SandStamp section has got the tone controls, it's got gain, it's got level, it's got reverb built into it. It also has a speaker sim built in there, and that's why you can plug this straight into a PA or an audio interface, a full range system. But of course, if you put that through a guitar amp, then you're going to get the actual guitar speakers. So you're putting a sim through the real thing. How would that work out? And the obvious answer seemed to be, well, it's got a switch on it, Andy. Just push the switch, turn the SandStamp off. But if you do that, you lose your tone controls. Okay, that's not too bad, because your guitar amp's typically going to have tone controls on it, but you also lose the reverb. Not the end of the world, I can play without reverb, but would it work if I wanted to use the reverb going through a guitar amp? That also matters to me, because as a backup to my main rig, I carry this, which is an Electro Harmonix 44 Magnum. If you don't know what one of these is, it's a guitar pedal sized box with a 40-odd watt solid state amp built into it. So it looks like a pedal, but no foot switch on it. All you get on it is a level control and a bright switch. So I was thinking, if I had one of these in my kit bag, if I plugged this into this and then put it into something like my Zilla 112, would I actually be able to use that and gig with it? So there, I've got no tone controls on this. I'm completely dependent on the SandStamp section on this for tone shaping and if I want reverb. So is that going to work out for me as well? Right, okay, let's go over and have a look at the pedals and see how they perform. Just a quick thing about when you see the pedals. I've got them set up with one cascaded into the other. I thought about doing them separately, but it just makes making the video really a little bit on the awkward side. So I've cascaded them, and I tried them both ways round, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to make any difference to the sound if the signal went, say, through the Flyrig and then into the RK, or through the RK and then into the Flyrig. These are not true bypass, and I just wanted to make sure that the buffer wasn't going to make any difference. It didn't. They sound the same either way round, so I've just videoed them one way. I can't even remember which way round I did the video, but rather than make it twice as long, just did it one time. I just mentioned at the beginning that it didn't make any difference whether they were that way round or that way round. Okay, let's see what the pedals have got to offer. I've got my SG here plugged first of all into the RK5, and then I've got a low cap cable linking through into the Flyrig 5, and then leading straight into my audio interface. And this is what the guitar sounds like, just plugged straight in with everything bypassed. Okay, and bringing in the SandStamp. So I've kind of set all the controls to round about their neutral positions as close as I could get them using the little tiny knobs on here. So just kicking in the Flyrig SandStamp section. and the RK5 section. Okay, and there was the first surprise for me in that those two to me sound completely different. So let me just, I'll edit the video at this point so we can hear them straight together, so hang on a second. Okay, so going off the spec sheets, I'd expected these two to sound really similar. Can I get them the same? Well, I can sort of increase the drive a bit on the FR5 5 because the RK5 certainly sounds a bit more meaty. And you can certainly get it closer and play around. That's not going to work, is it? But whatever I did, and given that these tone controls really are very powerful, you know, you kind of get a lot of adjustment for a little twiddle on the knob there, but I could not get these two to sound quite the same. So like I say, that quite surprised me, because certainly looking at the spec sheet, they look as though they really should be doing the same job. So okay, the next question I had was, could I actually get enough grind out of one of these units that I could use the Sansamp section as my main kind of amp sound, and then use the distortion bit to plug in to give me a boost on that? So did the obvious thing, and I just turned the drive up to 10. See how that ends up. So taking the fly rig first. And then on the RK, turn the level down a little bit on that. So I think the answer myself there is yes, there is enough drive to be able to use the Sansamp section as the sort of main crunchy guitar sound. However, I then figured, right, let's just put everything back to round about the middle of its range there, and let's kick in and see what in this case the Plexi, in this case the OMG section sounds like. So again, everything round about 12 o'clock on there, reverb at 3 o'clock, level at round about 9. And on the drive section here, I've got the level set roughly where it needs to be. The tone is all the way up because this is just a simple treble roll-off. So with the knob all the way over to the right, you're not taking any top end out. Drive it about halfway, and they're hot at around about 3 o'clock. And similar sort of settings on here. Drive about halfway, just maybe balance that level, but we'll set the level as we need it as we go. So okay, so in the Sansamp on the FR5 5, and then bringing in the Plexi section there. And then bringing in the, let's just, remembering that we turned the Sansamp back down to about halfway on the drive, bringing in the OMG. And for comparison, so again, quite different tones, but this time you'd expect it because we've got the different distortion section. And again, I think they're both fine. I would be happy to use both of them, but let's have a little, just check this one through. Three buttons to turn off this time. Okay, so again, quite different sounds, both very usable, I thought. And again, just to get an idea of the complete range of what we've got there. And getting an idea of, so the drive back to about the middle, just rolling that tone back to about halfway to take up some top. And just to kind of cover off the last piece of the puzzle. Right, and the other bit that's probably just worth mentioning is this, that we can also use the hot boost to boost the sandstamp section. So we can go from and likewise. Okay, so there you go, the FlyRig 5 and the RK5. The results of that actually did surprise me just a little bit. The specs looked to be the same, and I really did think that the units were going to sound exactly the same except for the drive. Clearly they didn't. Having said that, the tone controls are so powerful on them that even though I couldn't get them to quite match up, you could get them into the same sort of ballpark. Now, it's worth just mentioning that those tone controls really are very powerful, and I lived with these pedals for a couple of weeks before I made the video, and what I would find would be I'd plug it in and think, oh, you know, it's almost perfect, but if it just had a tiny bit more mid in it. And what I would find was that just adjusting the mid control in that case made the difference. So it's not like put them, you know, put the pointers round about 12 o'clock and it's going to be the same whether it's between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock on the face of the clock. There's a massive difference between there and there. So very, very powerful, and you kind of really do have to live with them and get an idea of how things interact. The whole business of turning up the gain on the sound samp and turning down the gain on the distortion, or turning up the gain on the distortion, turning down the gain on the sound samp, it completely changes the bites and the actual sort of feel of the distortion effect that you get out of it. So I think that the bottom line is I'm not going to try and decide which one's the better, simply because you could cover an awful lot of bases with either ones of these, you know, through from just breaking up kind of bluesy drive right through to pretty much full-on metal, but not with the same sound. You know, they do sound different to each other. I originally figured that what I was going to find was that I would prefer the FR5 and that I would end up using it with the sound samp set fairly clean, get the main part of the drive from the Plexi section, and then use the boost for soloing. And that's kind of the conclusion that I came to after testing as well, that I think that's where I'm going to go to with it. Certainly there was enough drive on the sound samp section to give a crunch sound, but I actually preferred the sound of the Plexi. So what I've ended up doing when I've used this is that I would turn the sound samp up to the point where if I really dug in hard on the pick, it was just crunching a little bit, but then get most of my sound from the Plexi and then use the boost to push it. The RK5, slightly different flavour. You know, it's I think a more modern, less Marshall bitey kind of sound. It's worth bearing in mind that this is a signature piece of kit, and Richie Kotzen seems to be one of those guys that takes his endorsements very seriously. I don't get the feeling that he's someone who just sits back and waits for a check to drop through the door in order to put his signature on something. You know, he's got his signature guitar, he ran Comfort signature amps for years, and now he's got this with a lot of input. You see him actually playing one of these things, you know, it's on the floor every time you see him on stage these days. So he seems to be, you know, a very serious endorser. And what that suggests is that the RK5 is made to do the job that Richie Kotzen wants it to do specifically, whereas the FR5 I think is designed from the ground up to be a more sort of generally usable kind of pedal. Having said that, I would use either one of these on virtually any gig that I would ever do. I think they're both absolutely fantastic. It just happens that this one actually matches the sound that I like to get out of my real gear just a little bit closer. Now, a couple of things that are just worth mentioning. One is that the first time I took this into the studio, I tried it directly into the PA. The PA was absolutely rubbish. It barely had enough juice to keep up with the drum kit for just the singer, and the sound was absolutely dreadful. The second time I took it in, we were in a different studio, better PA. It sounded fantastic, except that the drummer said that he could barely hear it because the speakers were out front of where the drum kit was. Those of us at the front of the stage could hear it absolutely fine. The guy at the back couldn't because we had no side fills. So the thing I would say is if you're going to use this with a PA system, then you need to be aware that you are completely at the mercy of the quality of the PA system, and you're completely at the mercy of the person who's actually handling the sound through the PA system. So if you get someone who is the singer's girlfriend or boyfriend who doesn't like guitar players, you're going to really suffer. If you get someone who's not used to actually handling a full-on guitar sound going through a PA, you're going to suffer from that. You may find yourself on a stage with an absolutely kicking sound that you can't hear at all. So, you know, you've got to be a little bit aware that going through a PA, it works great just to carry that in a power supply and a guitar and a lead, absolutely fantastic. But you have got a couple of things that, if you're used to using your own backline amps, that you need to take into consideration. Now, the other question that I asked about these was, could you use them through a guitar amp? And the answer is yes, you can. I thought about firing it up and doing a demo of that, but it gets to be a little bit tricky because it all comes then down to speaker placement and the like. So all I'll say is that it appears that the speaker simulation that Tech21 put on these is fairly benign. And by that I mean it's not slavishly following the the contours of a greenback or an H magnet Celestion or something like that. It seems to be rolling off that bit of top end that we generally want to roll off with speakers, tightening up the bottom end a little bit, but it's not too sort of radical in the mid-range. And I found that putting this through either my 44 Magnum or through a real amp going through a speaker, it sounded absolutely fine. I'd have no problem using it generally like that anyway. And in fact, I'm going to pick one of these up for myself. I will doubtless use it for things like open micers and sort of sitting gigs, or for rehearsals where I just get sick of lugging 100 weight of gear around at 2 o'clock in the morning. But also as a backup rig, so that if any of my gear goes down, I can actually replace a pedal board and an amp by going straight into a PA, or if I needed to, I could fire it up along with the 44 Magnum and certainly get through most gigs quite happily at that. So there you go, that is the FlyRig 5, that is the RK5. Maybe that's answered a couple of questions that you had that you've not found elsewhere. It certainly sorted things out for me. Absolutely love them. Tech21 have done a brilliant job on them, and yep, I'm going to spend some money and get myself one of these. So I am Andy Picker. These are the Tech21 FlyRig 5 and RK5. Hopefully that's been of some use to you. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Come back and see what we've got to offer next time out. Take care and see you soon.